Christy and I are going to have a conversation, so it'll all work out when it's supposed to work out. So, Christy, can you start off by telling us how this film came to being?
Yeah, and well, in 2020, it was my mother's 100th birthday. And it was also the centennial of the 19th Amendment, giving women the right to vote. My mother was born 5 days after the official adoption of the 19th Amendment, which I've always considered absolutely no coincidence. And so I wrote an article, and an old friend of mine, who's a very accomplished filmmaker named Abby Ginsburg, has made many, wonderful documentaries. She called me and said, I think I'd like to do a documentary about your mom. And I had spent a number of years going through my mother's papers, so I was fully, because I was planning then to write a book, and I'm still planning to write a book, but anyway, I was steeped in all kinds of knowledge, and so we decided to put our talents together and make a film. So that's how it all started, and it ended up. It was a little bit of a slow start, but it ended up taking about 3 years to get it done.
Thank you. I know that we have some communications students in the audience, so if you could give some advice to these students if they're interested in work in documentary or work in journalism or the media more generally.
Well, boy, I'd say number one, we need you more than ever. I mean, we really need, the media is so splintered and fragmented now. It was a different era when my mother was practicing it. Newspapers were king, and then television came in. But you had, shared audiences. There were 3 networks and nightly news programs. And so Americans were basically, hearing and listening and getting the same kind of information, and information that was being provided by professionally trained journalists. And so, it's a completely different world. I don't have to tell any of you about it. But boy, do we need people who really care about facts and care about fact-based reporting. So please, pursue that as a career. Practice it in through whatever media you want to. But we really need good storytelling, and storytelling that deals with important issues and does it from a fact-based perspective.
Okay, I'd like to dig in a little bit now to the film and some of the issues that came up for me in watching the film. And maybe the first question is going to be a very personal one for you. Your mother was clearly a larger-than-life figure. What was it like to have Liz Carpenter as your mother? You guys watching the film saw Lucy and Linda Johnson both talking about, well, okay, we're going to just acknowledge that she has some control over us. You were her daughter. What was it like?
Okay. Well, she was a working mom, so she was out doing her professional work during the day, and a lot of times in the evening. I think you saw in the film that in the era in which she was a journalist, and some beyond that, but in that era, Washington was a very social town. And Republicans and Democrats socialized together. And if you were a journalist, you wanted to go out in the evening because you could get information that might lead to a story you'd write the next day. You could develop sources for your stories. And so my parents were out a lot in the evening. But when my mother would swoop in, some after work or whatever, it would be like a tornado moving through the house. I mean, so there was always lots of action, and it was very lively. And I had to learn my brother and I had an elder brother, and we had to learn certain skills, like how to take a really good phone message. Even as like little kids, there'd be a pad there, and get the person to spell their name, and all these things. And we learned how to, we learned how to greet people. I mean, it was always anybody comes in the door or anybody you meet, you look them in the eye and you say, you say hello and you say what your name is. And so, no, as Linda says in the film, shyness was not a word in Liz's lexicon. So it was, learning those kind of skills. I mean, my parents were, both being journalists, and then my mom goes in the White House. I mean, our household was a one-conversation household, and that was politics. So, but I got, through my parents, exposed to a lot of things, exposed to all kinds of people in Washington. I mean, members of Congress and, and diplomats and et cetera, lots of journalists. A lot of their friends were journalists. And so I got to know, be around a lot of very interesting people. So it was not your typical childhood, but it was a stimulating one.
Excellent. So, other larger-than-life figures that were involved in this story. Talk to us about Lyndon Johnson. What was your mom's relationship like with President Johnson and Lady Bird Johnson?
Yeah, well, as you saw in the film, she met, Lady Bird was one of the first people that she met when she got to Washington in 1942 because Lyndon Johnson was off in the Pacific during the war for a part of the war, and Lady Bird was running his office. So, and then she was covering him constantly, all the way through his career as a reporter. So, and the Texans in Washington were a very close-knit community, so there was lots of social activity among all the Texans, whether they were lobbyists or members of Congress or, had a position in the executive branch, whatever. And so they would socialize with the Johnsons, my parents, as well as cover them in a professional capacity. So they got to know them quite well. And so LBJ, and when he gets elected vice president, as you saw, he picks up the phone as soon as a spot in his staff opened up right at the beginning and said, "Liz, I want you to come and work for me." So he knew she was a real can-do kind of person, and he was, of course, the quintessential can-do kind of person. So they shared a lot of characteristics, and so they had a really good rapport. So they could talk shorthand to each other, and as Bill Moyer said, she'd speak up to him, which she would do. Sometimes he didn't like it, but sometimes but he'd usually listen in any event. So there was just a kind of a closeness that developed over a long period of time. And same with Lady Bird, the same thing. And of course, and my mother and Lady Bird were very close friends all the way to Lady Bird's death. They were what they called each other kind of middle of the night friends. That if either of them needed to talk in the middle of the night, they knew that they could call the other and actually do that.
Well, yes, and they shared something in common. They were both graduates of the University of Texas, and they were both journalism majors at the University of Texas. So I'm wondering how much of a role that played in their bonding in D.C.
Well, it did play a role, particularly after my mother became her chief of staff and press secretary, because Lady Bird, even though she hadn't been a practicing journalist in the way that my mother had, she knew what it was about. She understood it. She knew what reporters did. She understood the difference between an AM deadline and a PM deadline and all these kinds of things. So it was much easier to engage Lady Bird in a meaningful way in all of these press trips and everything else, because it wasn't some foreign idea to Lady Bird that she would need to cater to and help these reporters tell their story by being forthcoming with information and thoughts about whatever the trip was about.
So it would not be wrong to say that Lyndon Johnson had an ego, I think. And I hear people laughing who are familiar with Lyndon Johnson's ways in that regard. It struck me watching the film, something that I've found in the archives, studying the Johnsons, his at times jealousy over Lady Bird's press. And that came out especially during the Whistle Stop tour that Lady Bird made through the South in October of 1964. maybe can you talk a little bit about why Lyndon Johnson at certain points in times struggled with the press and at other points in times could be quite good with journalists?
Well, he was the president. She was not. So the press is going to be a lot meaner and more confrontational to you by definition. So, and of course, the Vietnam situation was just, as my mother said, was just a nightmare to him, and a nightmare, of course, to millions who suffered from it, needless to say. So he, and there was a lot of social unrest that came from that. I mean, I was a college student at the time, and there were protests all over America constantly against the war. So, it was, and there were a lot of press that began opinion journalists that would take issue with his conduct of the war. And so, he got a lot of criticism, and that's just the nature of the beast when you're president of the United States. Lady Bird had an easier time. Obviously, she's not making the decisions, but also because she and my mother really worked hand in glove to give a human face to the poverty programs, to talk about civil rights, and then the whole environmental program of the Johnson administration, which I don't think a lot of people appreciate how expansive it was. I mean, Johnson got through dozens of environmental bills during the time that he was president, and Lady Bird was doing her best to highlight and have an impact and tell the story about certain aspects of it. But so anyway, that's kind of my sense of why their coverage was different.
Yes. So maybe he needed to back off on his concerns about her positive press reviews.
Yeah, no, I think he was always 100% supportive of Lady Bird. So,
oh, yes.
And he was so excited about her doing this campaign through the South on the whistle stop. I want to just mention one piece of fact in association with that. Lady Bird Johnson was the first lady to ever campaign on her own without the candidate. Not even Eleanor Roosevelt had gone out and campaigned without Franklin. So this was, not only was she going to the South in the immediate aftermath of the Civil Rights Act becoming law, but this was a really bold thing for a first lady. So and he couldn't have been prouder. I mean, he joined at the beginning. He joined, and then when they ended in New Orleans, he was there. So he was, I think a lot less jealous and a lot more supportive.
Right. And I think it's worth noting super quickly that New Orleans' conclusion to the trip, Johnson gives perhaps the best speech of the 1964 campaign in New Orleans that evening to a biracial audience in New Orleans, Louisiana, in October of 1964. And the first half of the speech is his standard 1964 campaign speech. And then he goes off the cuff. And that was when Johnson, in my study of him, was at his best, when he was not the prisoner of the microphone and was free. I'll continue to use the microphone, but was freewheeling with his delivery. And he went off in telling a story about how Southerners had allowed the politics of race to divide them and had, as a result, been unwilling to understand that poor folk have more in common with one another on questions of economics than they do on questions of skin color, and they best be considering questions of economics and social class. And it was an incredibly powerful speech. So sorry for that aside,
No,
but
that's good.
so let's move forward in our conversation out of the Johnsons and talk about your mom's work with the women's movement and feminism in the 1970s. How did she make that transition?
Yeah, she was just kind of freshly out of the White House. Nixon's inaugurated in 1969. And she goes to work for a large, very large public relations firm in Washington, part-time, and then she's writing a book and she's doing other things. And she gets a phone call from Betty Friedan, and I hope you all know who that was, but Betty Friedan was an iconic feminist who wrote, you probably know the year, The Feminine Mystique, which was a hugely important and influential book about how women who were sort of relegated by societal norms and so forth to be homemakers. And that's the only thing that a woman should be doing, is raising children and taking care of her husband and so forth. And she exposed the tremendous unhappiness of a lot of American women who, had not been able to develop any other aspect of themselves. They were just an extension of their children or their husbands. So what year was that? Was that like, anyway, so that Betty Friedan was a huge figure. So she calls my mother, and they hadn't known each other. And she says, Liz, I'm getting together all the women who are members of Congress, and believe me, there were not that many at that time, but Bella Abzug and Patsy Mink from Hawaii and Martha Griffiths of Michigan and Shirley Chisholm from New York and so forth. I'm bringing them together, and she with other women. There were women that were head of business and professional women and the League of Women Voters. Anyway, women who were working on policy and politics in Washington. And getting together because I think, and Bella agrees with me, Bella Abzug, also another member of Congress, agrees with me that the women's movement has kind of hit a wall. If we don't really get political, if we don't get focused on getting women elected to office, then we're just never gonna move things forward. So come to this meeting, and we're going to discuss the creation of a new organization. And my mother said, may I bring my daughter? And so I accompanied her to this meeting in this very crowded room, I gotta tell you. I was sitting on the floor, wide-eyed, and there was a lot of debate and discussion, but basically the outcome of it was the creation of a new organization, the National Women's Political Caucus, created for the purpose of getting women elected to office on the local level, state level, federal level. And it was just dynamite. It was really exciting. And that first meeting of this new organization, which I did not attend, but it was rowdy, and people are in the hallways and in the ladies' room, and they're debating this and they're debating that, and what should the organization do. And my mother said it was the most thrilling meeting I have ever been to. And she said while there was a lot of disagreement and some shouting and this and so forth, she said, I guess this is what a revolution feels like. So it was just catnip for her. And she was, from then on, she was just full steam ahead participating in the women's movement.
Excellent. So I know that the audience is going to want to ask questions, but I have two more if you will indulge me. The first question is another advice question. I know that we've got a lot of young women in the audience tonight, and if any of them are interested in political careers, what sort of advice would you give them? And do you have any words of comfort for anyone, regardless of age and regardless of their own political aspirations, who might have been hoping to see a woman in the White House before now?
Yes, it is taking a long time to get there. Well, I just, again, if you're interested in being a journalist, if you're interested in running for office, hooray, hallelujah. America needs smart, talented, committed, passionate people who really care about making life better. So I would just say, start going to, political meetings. If you feel an affinity for one of the political parties, then start going to the local, county meetings or the this or that, and whatever, there are all there are various books. There's organizations that really try to help young people. Oh, I know, Run for Something. I believe that's what one of ours called. And so you can take a look on the web at websites for organizations like that, and they've got all kinds of training, and they connect you with people. And the LBJ School for Public Affairs in Austin has a women's campaign school now. It's not a formal academic program, but it's something that if you're a woman and you're interested in running, they have programs that you could participate in.
Excellent. So last question, and it's the one I warned you about last night. So what would your mom say about the current state of American politics today?
Well, she'd be horrified and dismayed at how fractured our politics have become, and how how antagonistic and so forth. I mean, she practiced. I know it was a different era, but she practiced her politics with a sense of joy about it, because it was about making America better. So let's just be positive and let's try to make good things happen. We need more of that spirit. I think what she would say, because this is a time when a lot of people are upset about where we are, she would say, this is not a time to tune out. This is not a time to feel overwhelmed or to feel paralyzed. This is a time to get going. And I know it's not easy, and of course you all live busy lives studying, but there are ways to express your voice. Get out of your echo chamber, and get out of your comfort zone. Maybe put your phones down. Not that they can't be a vehicle to do certain things, but really think about how you can communicate your feelings most constructively and effectively to the decision makers. Believe it or not, congressional offices do track. They do track when people call and say, I'm against this or I'm for that. They do track all that. That does get reported. That doesn't mean that minds are going to be, turned around instantly or anything. But if we just lay back and are apathetic and just figure, oh, nothing I can do, well, then we get the government we deserve. And I think that's what she would say. Oh, I think she'd say one more thing. If I could just add.
Yes.
Yeah, I think that she'd say, we all stand on the shoulders of those who came before, those who fought the battles for civil rights and women's rights and peace and other causes, the environment. We all stand on the shoulders of everybody who's come before. And so it's really up to us, to all of us, to carry the torch forward and try to move things along in a positive direction. We really don't have the right to take things for granted that have been handed to us. So, yes.
All right, thank you. So we are now ready for audience questions. There's a microphone on either side of the auditorium. So, yes, and the spotlights are on them, so you can find your way. And please come up and ask questions. Don't be shy.
Thank you for that wonderful movie. That was really incredibly done. It was so entertaining. And I hope more people watch it, especially for Women's Week coming up. I wanted to know how your father might have supported your mother, because she was such a firecracker, and they worked together. And I would just like to know a little bit more about their relationship, especially knowing about maybe, the gender difference or expectations of gender at the time, and your mom was already a trailblazer in transcending those.
Okay, well, thank you. Yeah, I mean, I think for the era, my father was an unusual man. I mean, first of all, they met in high school. They met working on the Austin High Maroon newspaper. My mother was the editor-in-chief. My father was the business manager. Then they went off to the University of Texas and studied journalism together. I mean, at the same time. And so they had a lot of, their interests were totally in sync with one another. And several years after my mother got to Washington as a reporter, my father, who had to serve in the Navy during the war, joined her. Anyway, he was what we'd call today a very enlightened man. He was not threatened by having a wife who was getting herself a lot of attention. I mean, he was no shrinking violet. He was a strong person too, not as flamboyant, not as colorful, but he was also a strong person, and he just believed that they worked together, so they were together 24/7, and he just was always completely supportive of her and her accomplishments. So it's just, it was unusual, but God bless him, because I don't know what would have happened if he hadn't been that kind of man.
Are there other questions out in the audience? If they're not, I can always come up with some more, but I would rather hear your questions. Yes.
Hi, my name is Dulce. I'm a public policy major, and I'm minoring in Mexican American Studies. For the feminist movement, what are some ways that you think we could be, like, on our messaging? How could we include all women from all parts of the world in the feminist movement? And what types of resources or like media, do you think media, like film, like I know you guys produced this film to tell a story. Do you think film is a effective way to tell the stories of other women's stories? And how do you think that translates in people that have never, I guess, interacted with women from other regions of the world or understand fully the political climate or the culture? How do you think we can come together, like what tools we can use to come together and really fight for women, but all women? And yeah, that's my question. And thank you so much for coming and speaking to us. But yeah.
I'm not sure I understood all of that, because it was a little quiet, but so women in film and international.
So you are, just to make sure we're understanding your question, you are asking how can the women's movement be inclusive of all women regardless of background? So thinking along racial and ethnic lines and social class, and how can the women's movement be inclusive as opposed to exclusive, and be international, not specific to a particular country?
Yes.
Yeah. Well, yeah, when she's talking about film specifically.
And is film a good tool?
Yes.
Yeah, well,
Yes.
film is a great tool, because storytelling is a very powerful way of getting people, of increasing understanding, of course, across cultural and other boundaries. So film is a great tool, and if my co-filmmaker were here, because this is my one and only film, and she's made lots, she would be able to reel off all kinds of wonderful films from different countries and so forth about women. But I'm less well equipped to do that. But I think that if you're are you studying film by any chance?
I'm interested in doing film research.
In what?
Like
Film research.
Yeah, film research, yeah. Well, there are lots of international film festivals and things, which would be a place to look for interesting content. We need more great filmmakers, that come from a variety of backgrounds, telling stories of just people that are here in America. I'm not sure how else to steer you, but I think it's a noble goal, because I find just watching some of the things I see on Netflix and places now that they're bringing more international programming, and some of it's entertainment, it's not all documentaries. I just find I learn a lot, by seeing content that originates from other places. I wish I knew more to share with you right now.
I guess I'll add just a couple of thoughts on how to make the women's movement feel more inclusive and less exclusive. And I think that comes, I think that one approach to addressing that comes from horizontal leadership as opposed to vertical leadership. And so if you feel like a movement that you maybe agree with its issues, but you maybe feel like that movement isn't listening to your voice or your community's voice, go elbow your way in to that movement. And because if there's a sense of alliance and affinity with regard to the issues, hopefully the movement leadership would be welcoming for additional voices. And so I think that is part of the approach, and I think that taking advantage of the new media is a way to get messages and stories out there. I guess the last thing I would say is it's hard to hate someone or something when you know that someone or something. So it is really, really important to tell the stories of the disadvantaged and the marginalized so that there is more inclusivity and a more welcoming of the different stories in our giant world that isn't as big. It's a lot closer. We're a lot closer connected than we often think, and so let's lean into those connections and make sure that we're always making a space at the table for additional voices. I hope that answered your question, and keep fighting the good fight.
Thank you.
Yes, I am a student in Ms. Young's class.
Get close to the microphone if you
My name is Reese. My question is more about just what the process was for making the documentary. You said it was a 3-year-long process. I guess my question was what the process was like, really brief, and who all was alongside you, like going through all the events of. I loved the documentary. That's all. So yeah, like what was your process?
Yeah, well, thank you for asking it. First of all, Abby and I sat down and talked. I knew because I'd done all this research going through my mom's papers, I knew that the story should probably be told in 3 chapters. Journalism, and then basically the White House years, and then the women's movement. I mean, my mother did some other things, but there was no, as Abby would say, a documentary is a profile, it is not a resume. So, so we knew we wanted to have 3 major acts, three areas of story. And so I knew where a lot of things probably were. Having gone through her papers, that she did a long interview with C-SPAN, and it was what year. I knew, what were the whistle stop, I knew tons about. I knew various things, and I knew where there was video of a number of things. But then we hired an archival producer, who was a woman in Austin, and she went out and just surveyed the landscape and turned up all kinds of video as well as still photographs. And then Abby knew 2 great editors, and they did. One worked on it about the first 2/3 of the film, and then because she had to leave the project for unrelated reasons, and then she filled in with another editor, and they were both very talented, very good. So I created story points for each of the 3 chapters, so that there were certain things that had happened and messages I knew we would want to tell about my mother's life. And so that was helpful to the editors who really didn't know anything about her till they came into the project. And then I knew I had enough connections with the people that we interviewed in the film to reach out to them, get them to agree to do an interview. And then I actually conducted the interviews. I mean, Abby a lot of times would be there and she'd pitch in with some questions too, but basically, you know, from Dan Rather and Bill Moyers and Gloria Steinem and the two Johnson daughters and Doug Brinkley, the presidential historian. Anyway, these were people I was able to line up and set up the interviews. And then it's a matter of weaving together those interviews with the archival material and to create, to create an engaging, compelling story. And one of the challenges was my mother was very funny, and that was part of her power. But a lot of her humor was either off-the-cuff humor or it was on the stump. Well, there's no video of 99% of that. So we did the best we could. We wish we had more clips of her being funny, but hopefully we gave enough of a taste of it that people, that it came, that sensibility of hers came through. Does that answer your question?
Yes, I'm
Okay.
Going into digital media, and I'm interested in editing, and so I thought you did a beautiful job. So,
Well,
yeah, thank you.
Editors are, for any film, editors are just, a great editor is key, absolutely key. So congratulations, keep working on it. It's so important.
And thanks for the good question. Other questions from students or other audience members? Yes. Excellent.
Hello, my name is Giselle Kennison, and I'm a senior. I'm studying business. And I had two questions. My first one is, how would you categorize the women's movement from the past versus today?
So the question was to compare the women's movement from the past with the women's movement today. So that's a dissertation. So for someone out there, yeah. So I would say, I'm trying to keep this not into a dissertation. So I would say that the women's movement has been responsive to the issues of the moment. And I would say also, I would caution you against thinking that the women's movement comes and the women's movement goes. The women's movement has been a constant. It's just that as a society, we've paid more attention to it at certain moments in time and less attention to it at other moments in time. And there's been a lot of wonderful scholarship on that. So you might have heard in a high school history class, hopefully not in a college history class, about the waves of the women's movement. My colleague Leandra Zarno, who's somewhere out there maybe, has written about why we should abandon the waves metaphor for studying the women's movement and look more at continuations across the decades. But it does seem to be responding to what is the issue of the day. So think what's going on in our headlines now. Much of the women's movement today is focusing on questions of access to health care, as women's health care options have been limited by the Supreme Court in very recent years. So that's a very immediate and pressing concern. If the news and the issues change, then I suspect the demands and the concerns, what is foregrounded and what is not, will change as well. And I would encourage you to be a part of that conversation. As I was saying to the woman earlier, if there is something that you think needs to be done, become a part of the conversation, demanding attention to that thing. No one is too young to be an agent of change in this world. Dr. Martin Luther King Jr. was in his 20s when he became involved in the Montgomery bus boycott. Think about Greta Thunberg today and her pushback about the climate and environment. Think about Malala and Yousaf and her activism on behalf of women's education in Afghanistan. Young people have a lot to say to this world, and us old folks need to listen to you. And if we listened more and talked less, maybe the world would be a better place. Okay. Unless somebody has a burning question, which means you need to be sprinting to the microphone now. I'm looking at the time, and we're after 8 o'clock, and it is a school night. Some of you might have exams tomorrow or the next day. Not for me, but okay, so we do have one more person coming. So this will be our last question.
Thank you. My name is Chimizri Achife. I am a business major with a hopes to have a political science master's in the future. My question for you would be what type of obstacles would you say your mother had to endure? Because I know it wasn't that easy back then.
So the question was, what type of obstacles did your mother have to endure?
Oh, well, first of all, she arrives in Washington in 1942, wanting to be a journalist with her scrapbook of clippings under her arm. Most newspapers did not hire women at all. They had policy. They did not hire women. The National Press Club was closed to women until 1971. And I think in the film you saw how when she was president of the Women's National Press Club, she worked to, make inroads to broaden the opportunities for women. So she faced those kinds of obstacles. In that era, covering stories. She was interviewing congressmen and senators and so forth all the time. Well, they're all men, basically. They're sprinkling of women. And so, she had to present herself in such a way that they would take her questions seriously. There were, it was tough for all women journalists. The White House years, of course, she's in the White House on the staff, so that, gives you a certain cachet. Because she was able to accomplish a lot more in the White House because she had that long-term relationship with LBJ. So she was able to be part of the political operation of the White House as well, because she, of course, was politically savvy, but also because she had that relationship and could go directly to the president if she needed to. Very few people on First Lady's staffs have that kind of clout. So she was able to overcome those kinds of obstacles. So I guess those would be the main things that come to mind.
Would you say some of those obstacles still exist today for women in politics?
Are there obstacles today?
The question was, are there still obstacles today for women in politics?
Some of the obstacles that your mother was facing, would those same obstacles still be occurring present day?
In terms of thinking that women can't be trusted with power, take a look at Kamala Harris. Good grief. Never was anyone more, she was extremely qualified, and she almost won. But, I think that the fact that she was a woman and a woman of color was probably made that margin of difference. Mm-hmm. And so, yeah, the obstacles are still there. They're breaking down slowly but surely, but they're definitely still there.
Yeah.
Okay, thank you.
I was, just to add a little bit onto that, I was looking at a Pew Research poll from 2023, so just a couple of years ago, about attitudes toward women in power, and still the public trusts women less as political leaders to deal with an international crisis than a male politician to deal with an international crisis. And it goes on and on. You can Google Pew 2023 attitudes about women in politics, and you'll probably find the correct survey. And if you want to find it and that doesn't work for you, you can find my email at UH, and I'll happily send it to you, because it's a very informative survey, and it suggests that we need to work on ourselves. If we want better leaders, we need to expand our definition of who is a leader and what does a president look like. So I'll challenge us with that. And I guess I'll close us out by thanking you guys for being a wonderful audience, thanking Christy Carpenter and her team for making an amazing documentary and bringing it to Houston, and honoring University of Houston with the Houston debut of this film. And so I'm just going to shift into my standard Center for Public History close. It's short. At the Center for Public History, we rely on the generous support of people like you who are equally committed to keeping Houston's history alive and supporting our mission of helping students learn valuable skills. If you liked what you heard this evening, please consider supporting us by making a charitable contribution to CPH to support student researchers working on the Sharing Stories project or any of our many other projects. And this is not to students, this is to people who have money, because students don't have money. I know that, I'm the parent of a student. So if you're interested in supporting our work, you can text NWC 77 to 71777. And we thank you very much for coming out, learning more about Liz Carpenter and the important role of women in journalism and women in politics. Thank you.